How are you?
Hello, hello.
Hello. Just 1 second. Okay.
Yep.
Now I'm ready.
So, hey guys, welcome to our live. My name is Tara.
And I'm Tanya. Hi.
Hi. So, Tanya and I just had the opportunity to meet yesterday just to talk about a little bit of what we wanted to talk about on this live. And she is a huge inspiration to me. She's also just such a lovely person. So, without further ado, the way that we're going to kind of structure this is we're going to kind of chat for maybe 20-30 minutes. And then throughout it, please, if you have questions, put them down in the comments. And we'll try to answer them as they come up. Or we'll do like a quick 10-minute Q&A at the end. Sound good? Awesome. Perfect. Cool.
Yes. Thank you so much for your kind words. And I just want to say, I think the same for you. I told you everything yesterday. You're just a huge inspiration for all of us. So I'm happy to discuss our clinical rotation and our experience with all the people who are watching.
Yeah. So, Tanya, are you still on any electives right now, or have you just finished one?
No, I finished a few months back, actually, the last one at Florida. And now I'm actually preparing my application, ERAS application.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, exactly. So I was thinking maybe we can discuss in more detail our experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So if you would like to tell us something more about your US clinical experience, if I'm not wrong, you had a rotation at the clinic in New York.
Yes.
So can you talk more about it?
Yeah, so I had a rotation. It was 2 months long with a pediatric private practice in New York City, and then also where half of my time was spent at the private practice, but then the other half of my time was spent at a child abuse clinic, learning about child abuse and kind of behavioral indicators. So I spent half of my time working directly with patients. I was given kind of graded levels of independence as the weeks of my elective went on, which was fantastic as a medical student. And my elective in its entirety was based in pediatrics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then you were at an elective in New York. What was yours in again? Remind me.
I was actually at Florida.
Sorry, Florida. I was in New York. You were in Florida.
Yeah, exactly. So it was as well 2 months long. It was also a private clinic, and I really liked it because for the first time I had an opportunity to write my SOAP notes in electronic medical records. And I think for IMGs that's really important because it's just a different system comparing to our country. So I really liked the experience. We also had the freedom to do a lot individually and by ourselves. So we were responsible for taking histories and then presenting the case to attending. Afterwards, we would discuss the case, we would suggest some treatment or diagnostic tests or anything that we suppose it's actually the best next step. And then we would write SOAP notes at EMR, which was actually, I think that was the most valuable thing for me because I learned how to write concise notes.
Yeah.
What parts to write where, and it was really beneficial for me as well.
Yeah, that was something that I also got to experience. And EMR, I go to medical school in Ireland for reference in my 4th year, and in Ireland, we don't use a lot of electronic medical records. Everything is still done in paper files for the most part for us. So it's really, really, I think, important as someone who's applying to the US to make sure that you get that kind of breadth of experience with an electronic medical record.
I absolutely agree. In Serbia, I'm from Serbia. I studied there. It's the same. We do use some kind of EMR, but it's completely different system than here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think some IMGs have that opinion that if you can get a rotation that we actually discussed, if you can get a rotation in huge university hospital, then don't try it. And I think even in a smaller clinics, you can get very, very valuable experience that you can use for your CV, ERAS CV, then for a topic for an interview, and you're also exposed to MR, and you will work with that thing tomorrow on your residency. So I think it's really good to find any opportunity that you can find in US and it's going to benefit you.
Yeah, and I think something that I was actually thinking about last night after we got off of our call was that something that I found being at a smaller clinic as compared to a larger institution was that at my elective, I was the only medical student. So, which was really lucky for me, but that meant that all of my time with my attending was valuable teaching time, because it was a lot of one-on-one interaction. And then some of my colleagues that were in the larger institutions, where they still had an amazing time, were with larger numbers of students. So they had to share teaching time with the attendings. So there are different pros and cons to doing each. And I think that no matter what you're doing, there are ways to get the most out of your experience, whether you're at a large university hospital or a smaller private clinic like we were doing.
Absolutely agree. And what you mentioned, I like that you mentioned that, how to use your opportunity in the best way. I just want to emphasize, because I had opportunity to meet some fellow students who were there with me in a rotation, and some of them, they were really afraid to ask questions because they thought, okay, if I ask something, that means I don't know it, I'm not good enough. And I think that's really not a good approach. I think you should always ask, because that's how you learn, and they expect from you that you ask questions. So I was like, I have a feeling I was so annoying during my rotation. I was just asking every single thing. Can you please elaborate this? Can you please explain me this? But that's the way how you can just use everything that you can during those 2 months or 1 month or whatever, just to learn as much as you can. So it's really important to ask questions, and don't feel afraid to ask questions.
Yes. And actually, the advice that I was given from my attending was actually that they preferred because I was in a pediatric practice, so it's with kids and their parents, sometimes she preferred that I asked questions in front of the parents. I felt really awkward doing that, but sometimes she preferred that I asked the question, because then it gave the parent an opportunity to learn something as well as myself. So sometimes by asking the question, you're not only helping your learning, but it's also helping with the parents and the patients themselves and their own learning about their condition.
Yeah, I really like that approach, actually. It sounds really interesting. I never had that opportunity, but now when you said it, it sounds really beneficial, because both you and parents will get the answer. So it's actually a really interesting approach. I like it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you also, do you have any other US clinical experience beside that, or did you do anything in Ireland or Canada? Can you tell me more about that?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So actually, before going to my placement in New York, I spent 2 weeks in Toronto in Canada doing a elective at a pediatric urgent care clinic. So if it's not obvious from my elective experiences that I've chosen, I'm looking to match into pediatrics this year. And the pace of the two clinics is very different. Both of them were smaller clinics, but one of them was more of an urgent care setting, and the other one was more of a kind of outpatient private practice type setting. So something that I found was helpful, especially in approaching my ERAS application, was trying to pick out the points of the two electives that were different from each other. That way I could highlight different parts of different skills that I utilize in each elective on the ERAS application, so that you're highlighting the various skills that you have. Did you do any other electives besides the one that you did in Florida? I can't remember.
Yeah, I did one in Chicago for 1 month last year, and it was also in a smaller clinic. And I like that you mentioned that, because I got actually on my Instagram, I get a lot of questions. How can I describe my experiences different if I did the same thing on all my rotations? And it's really good point that you made now. Okay, we take histories, we do physicals or whatever in most of our rotations. But on every single rotation has something special to you, and I'm sure every single rotation is different for you in some way. So I just think it's sometimes it can be hard to find that thing, but it's really important to find some kind of differences between rotations, because we cannot just write the same description for every single experience that we have. Yeah. So for example, this one that I had in Chicago, I did mostly similar things as here, but again, it was completely different kind of experience. I did not use EMR. It was like a paper-based
Oh
clinic.
yeah.
A different kind of patients. We, for example, emphasize on prevention, on screening tests,
Mhm.
on advising patients on that. So you can always find something that just stick to your mind when you remember that rotation that you did. So it's really important to implement that in a good way in your ERAS application. Definitely.
Mhm. And then now you mentioning that kind of brings me back to something that I've been trying to do in my Eris application, with
Mhm.
these elective experiences and just with my other non-medical experiences, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later. But something that I've been trying to do is you can look up the ACGME clinical competencies that they want residents to demonstrate by the end of their residency.
Mhm.
And there are some of these things that we're already being exposed to as final year students, as students in these electives. So sometimes I'm trying to frame what I've been doing as, oh, this is something that I've experienced, and here's how it relates to one of the core ACGME clinical competencies that you'll be expecting from me as a resident.
Mhm. That's really great advice, actually. That's really great advice, especially for your application. We should be really careful how to
Mm-hmm.
fill that out, and we all have problems with that. So it's really good to get any piece of advice. So I love this advice, actually. It's really good.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to
So
ask you, how did you, so I know that we both got our electives in slightly different ways. How did you get your elective experiences in Florida and Chicago?
So that's a really great question, because I think a lot of people are struggling with the same thing. In my country, there's not a lot of people. Personally, I didn't know anyone who is doing USMLE, so I didn't have a colleague just to ask for recommendation, or to have some doctor in US who would recommend me some hospital or some electives. So I actually did all my rotation after graduation, and I found it online. So I was Googling like crazy. I joined all the Facebook groups for USMLE prep, and I just sent, I don't know, I think hundreds emails. I really tried every single place, and then pandemic happened, so I actually had some other rotations scheduled in hospitals, but they just stopped all rotations because of pandemic. So I had to figure out how to find experience with all of this happening around us.
Mm-hmm.
So I found it online, and I just applied, and I was lucky enough to find those two and to be accepted in those two. So that's my experience. I know other people also are asking me, I don't have anyone to ask, so how can I find experience? Nobody knows me. So I just want to encourage them. Nobody knew me, and I still got a chance to find an experience. So it's really important just to try and just to apply and to send emails
Mm-hmm.
and use internet for everything that you need.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And
Definitely.
then the other piece of advice that I would give, kind of to jump off of that, is that you don't you don't know if someone will help you unless you ask.
Mm-hmm.
So I got
Yeah.
my experience in New York City because it was like a friend of my old neighbor's friend's kid's pediatrician.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
it was a really roundabout way of going about it, but you never really know who is willing to help you or who knows somebody that might be able to help you unless you start asking the question. And
Exactly.
you never really know who else, what your network is really made of unless you start asking. You start sending these emails, and so you start texting and saying, hey, how are you doing? I'm having this problem. Do you think you could help me? And I think I got 100 no's before I got the one yes.
Yes.
So it's,
Completely agree.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm also really lucky that my medical school in Ireland is really helpful and has a lot of other students that are doing the USMLEs and that are applying to residency in the States and are trying to do electives. So it means that it's a lot easier for me, and I still had a really, really hard time. So if there's one thing I can say to anyone watching this live, is that if you're having a hard time finding an elective or getting additional experience in the US, you're not alone. All of us have a hard time with it. It seems like some students it comes easier than others, but all of us have a hard time with it, and that's okay.
Yeah. Completely agree. And sometimes I feel like I'm repeating the same things all over again on my Instagram, but I just want people to know that it's not easy for any of us.
Yeah.
We all have some kind of struggles and some kind of problems, and it's okay. As you said, it's really important to ask for help, because if you don't ask, you will not get an answer. So it's okay to get a no as an answer. It's okay not to get a reply to your email.
Yeah.
Just keep trying, and eventually you will find some kind of experience or some person who is actually willing to help. So it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
What we mentioned that we would like to discuss as well, I would just like to hear your story about your visa status.
Mm-hmm.
On what visa, your electives, and anything about that.
Yeah. So to give a little bit of a backstory on my visa history, I'm Canadian. I'm a Canadian citizen, born and raised here. I'm currently in my old bedroom at my parents' house. And I've been in the US before on an F1, on an OPT, and on a TN, and then Canadians don't need tourist visas, so I've just been to the US other times, just crossing the border as a tourist. So for me to come in and do an elective, I needed to do a B1 waiver process, which basically as a Canadian means that I present all my documents at the border, and then they give me the answer right away, yes, no, you can come in, you can't come in, which is a little bit scary as a Canadian, because you're like, I'm supposed to be starting this elective on Monday. I'm at the airport on a Sunday trying to get in to start my elective tomorrow. Can you help me? And luckily, I haven't had any issues. I've had other students have issues. So I think it's really important that you have all of your ducks in a row. Any letter that you have from your elective that's confirming that you have a spot, like print that off, bring it with you to your appointment, or to your, if you're Canadian, bring it with you to the border. I had any form of documentation that I could get. Letters from my medical school saying that I am coming back to finish my final year. Letters from the elective that I was doing saying these are the finite dates that you're here for, and that I will be returning, and that I am responsible for all of my financials while I'm in the US. So having all of your documentation is really important. Now, I know that your visa situation was different.
Yeah, actually, by the way, it sounds really stressful to find out on the airport, like, come on. Okay. So for people outside US and Canada, I think the process is quite different, because you do need a tourist visa, B1, B2, to enter US. And I just want to highlight, because I also get a lot of questions about that, you can do your rotation on B1, B2. The only problem, not a problem, but just the thing that you are supposed to be aware of, is that you are not allowed to do any procedures on the patients with B1, B2, which is fine. You know, you can still do other things, but I did both of my rotations at B1, B2 tourist visa, and I did have some problems, because previously I was twice on J1 visa for some completely unrelated thing. And then when you ask for another visa, they actually need a lot of proofs that you will come back to your country. So as you mentioned, I needed a pile of documents to prove that I will be back. I don't have any intention to stay legally in United States. So you just really, for a visa interview, I would just advise all the people that you should be ready to answer every question that they have. Don't lie. So just be honest. And if you have a letter of invitation from a hospital or clinic, that would be the best option, because then you can clearly explain why you're requesting visa and why you want to go to US for a month or two, and that you're planning to come back and to continue your internship or work or whatever you're doing in your country. So it's really important to do the visa part first, because I had some cases of people that I met online that they got approved for rotation, and then they were not able to get a visa, which is really unfortunate, you know. So you need to plan your visa in advance, especially with this pandemic happening around.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. So yeah.
So on this vein of thought, it looks like Clark in the comments has a question about visas. And I think you'd probably be better to answer it because it says, was that a hands-off rotation with your tourist visa? Or were you still able to be hands-on?
We were able to touch the patients. You know, it's not that we were forbidden to do anything. We just didn't do any invasive procedures. So I was able to do basic physical examination, you know. So, for example, you cannot give shots. Mm-hmm. Sometimes now I'm not sure about the rules. I think it's really, really important and depends on the clinic, what they will give you to do. So if you just follow the rules, your visa rules do not actually allow you to touch the patient when you're a tourist visa because of malpractice issues and other stuff. But I have heard the stories and I had some personal experience that some attendings, if they have trust in you, they'll give you to do something, you know, with supervision, of course. You will not do that alone, but you can have some kind of hands-on experience even on tourist visa. So I think you can just try to use as much as you can. And there are a bunch of attendings and really nice doctors who will just let you do whatever you think will help you, you know.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and I think that kind of also jumps into, I see a question from Scary Amy about problems faced at the border crossing. So I think I can talk a little bit about that because as a Canadian, it's not necessarily that Canadians are waived from requiring visas most of the time, but we still need to come in under a status. It's a weird loophole that we have as Canadians. But that means that everything is processed at the border crossing. And my biggest pieces of advice when you're at the border crossing is just to be as calm, as polite, and as prepared as possible. So I showed up with all of my documents stacked in a folder, and the border agent's like, hey, why are you trying to cross into the US? And I explained to her, hey, I'm a medical student. I'm doing a rotation in New York City. Here's the letter from the rotation that I'm doing. Here are the dates that I'm going to be here for. And then she said, okay, do you have any other documentation? I pulled out my folder, had all of it ready for her. She looked it over really quickly, stamped everything, and said, you're good to go. So being prepared and demonstrating that you're prepared and you understand the limitations of the visa that you're under, I think is really important. Again, you and I aren't visa experts. So we really can only talk about the experiences that we've had with the visa process. So if you do have any really specific questions about visas and border crossings, and I know that a lot of people are having problems with visas right now because of either the pandemic or global situations in the US having places that are banned to travel from and all of those things. If you have further questions, I would speak to an immigration expert just because you and I can only speak to our experiences.
I completely agree. Like, this is just our experiences. So we are far from experts from visas. So if you have any visa problem, maybe it's similar that I had, maybe it's similar that she had, but it's the best to just call an official, to go to official website of the embassy. That's the safest option. You cannot find those information online, definitely.
Yeah.
I would just like to go back to our clinical rotation because I just had some other questions for you. So, do you have any advices for people who are currently on rotation or they're planning to do rotation, elective, observership, whatever, how to maximize their experience and what they should do into rotation to get the best experience as possible?
Great question. One that I get asked all the time, and I've posted about it a couple of times on my Instagram, which if this is going to be the moment that I plug, I have an Instagram, which is at Tara Jameson Music. You can go and find me over there. Follow me. I post a lot of music, but I also post a lot of med school tips. And the thing that I always come back to when it comes to talking about how to get the most out of your elective experience, one is kind of just be professional. So those really professionalism things, dress appropriately, be on time, ask questions, those kinds of things, just the basic professionalism of it. And then the other part of it is just showing up and being involved. So it's one thing to show up and be professional, but to not really show interest or be involved. It's another thing to show up and demonstrate I'm invested in this elective. I'm invested in these patients. And because of that, the attending that I was with gave me a lot of grace and gave me a lot of leeway when it came to asking questions and when it came to demonstrating interest. And that also gives them, if you're looking for something like a letter of recommendation from your elective experience, it allows them to write more about you because you've demonstrated that you're involved and that you have commitment to the area that you're in.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Those are really great advices.
Mm-hmm. And then what was your experience with kind of what advice would you give?
So I would agree with everything that you said. So I would just add some other small things maybe. As you said, it's really important to be there on time. Like, don't late. Wake up earlier and be there on time. Sometimes if you have an opportunity, stay longer. Ask,
Mm-hmm.
do you need anything else? Do you need help with the paperwork? Ask MAs, medical assistants.
Yeah.
Ask nurses. They're the huge part of the clinic flow, and clinic would not work without them. So just be involved with them as well. I had that kind of experience that I learned so much from nurses and medical assistants. They were so approachable and they were so ready to give you advices, to give you some tips. So I think it's really important to be involved with every single team member, because you can learn from everybody there. So just as you said, be present, ask questions, be there on time, stay longer if you want to. It's just, you can leave a better impression if they see that you're engaged and that you have a really, really great wish to do well on that rotation. So simple.
Yeah. I would always show up 15 minutes early. Like, if they give you a time to come at 9 a.m., I would be there at 8:45 or 8:30. Like, be there early. And then you made a really, really great point about other staff in the facility that you're in. Like, when I would step out to take my 30-minute lunch break, we had a little grocery store next door, and I would usually pick up, like, I would bring my lunch with me, but I might go and pick up like a coffee from the grocery store next door. You always ask the receptionist, the nurse at the front desk, hey, I'm going to step out next door. Here's what I'm doing. Do you want anything on there?
Yeah,
99 times out of 100, like, they said no for me. But that one time they were like, oh my gosh, yes, I haven't been able to step away from the desk and eat anything. I know you can't take over my job at the desk. Could you grab me a bite to eat?
Yeah.
And it's just the basic human kindness that you need to show other people in the clinic.
Those are such a small things, but they're going a long way, So just be polite with everybody. Ask them, as you said, do they need anything? Do they need any help? Can you do anything for them to make their job easier in some way?
Yeah.
So it's really, really important. And I just wanted to add, now I remembered when you were talking. Also, you were the only med student.
Yeah.
In my rotation, it was around 10 of us, maybe more at some point. And it's also important, I would say, to help each other. Some students will be shy. Some students, it's going to be their first time in US. They'll be insecure of their English. There are so many different stories that you don't know. So I think it's important to help each other as well, and not just to be like this, I'm doing my job and I want to make a nice impression and I don't care about you. So we have to help each other. If they have a question, ask them, do you understand this? For example, if you're here for a while and they just arrived, they're like new incoming students, always ask them, do you need help with anything? If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I can guide you. I can show you around the clinic. I can show you if you have some problems with the notes, with patients, whatever. So I think it's also important just to show your colleagues as well, med students or graduates, that you want to help them as well if they need any help.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is something that's so, so important. So important. So I was 99% of the time was the only medical student, but we did have one other student join us for like 1 or 2 days. And it is, as you said, very important to show up as a team player. So I do see a couple of questions coming in on the chat. So I see, would you recommend getting a letter of recommendation from residents if you've barely interacted with attendings? I think for me, my letters of recommendation, there weren't any residents in my clinic because it was a private clinic, so there weren't any residents. So I don't know the answer to that question.
So I actually got that question on my Instagram. I personally as well, I do not know the answer, but I did some research online and I checked on some Facebook groups what other people advise on that. And actually I found that the answer is that they do not recommend that resident writes you a letter. I'm not an expert again. I just wanted to answer my followers because a few of them actually asked me the same question. So I just did a small research. You can check on Facebook groups. You can ask. You can check on some forums. But what I was able to find is that mostly people do not recommend residents to write a letter.
Good to know. Good to know for everyone. And then the other question I saw, which Tanya, again, you might be more equipped to answer because you have already graduated. They've asked, can hands-on rotations be after you've graduated from medical school?
Yes.
Great. Awesome.
As I said, it depends on the clinic where you apply. Is it observership? Is it externship? Depends of the type of rotation, but you can, yes.
Mm-hmm. So Tanya, you'd mentioned earlier that you are starting to prepare your ERAS application because the deadline is coming up a little too quickly for my tastes, but it's coming up very quickly. So what are you doing right now with your ERAS application to help get things ready for the deadline at the end of September?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of us are struggling with the same, especially with those deadlines. So I'm working currently on my CV and I actually have my biggest problem is to describe experiences, as I said, because when I think about it, I have a feeling, oh my God, I just did the same thing everywhere. So how can I describe that in a different way? How I can highlight some important things that I have learned during that experience. So I'm actually Googling some advices online and I'm trying to make that description concise. I would not recommend to write a very, very long description because no program director will read that. So I'm trying to be concise as possible. And I actually got some great advices online. So those are not my personal advices. It's just something that I learned during my process. That it's the best that first you describe shortly your experience. So what your responsibilities and roles were shortly. And to say, completed a 4-week rotation, 8-week rotation, just those technical things. And then at the end, which I think is really important, and me myself personally, I will forget to include that. It's important to include what skills you learned during this experience. So how these benefit you to become a better physician, and what skills that can benefit you for your residency tomorrow have you learned during this experience. So I started just with, bullet points. I did this, I did this, I did this, and I didn't include, okay, but this experience learn me how to, be a better team player. I had some leadership skills, like also improved and stuff like that, so we can just add something in that manner, at the end. And what are you doing right now?
So I'm also, I've for the most part finished off my ERAS application, and a big question that I had early on in the process and that I got some great advice on was, should I be doing like full paragraphs or should I be doing just bullet points in those like open blurbs? And the advice that I got was somewhat specialty specific, but also personal preference. So for the advice that I've gotten from other students is that for most specialties, it just comes down to personal preference. Like I prefer to write paragraphs. Some of my friends prefer to write bullet points. So that was one thing. But the other thing that they mentioned was that some specialties receive a lot more applications than others. For example, some of my friends applying in family medicine, they're like, there are so many applications that the program directors have to go through. So they went to a family medicine conference and the program directors were recommending, hey, we have to sit here and read through 1,000 applications, put all of your information in bullet points.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think it comes down to what specialty you're applying to, but also to personal preferences. And then the other thing that I've been doing recently is finalizing my program list. So finalizing like where exactly I'm applying to. And then I'm currently attending a lot of webinars. So if you haven't heard of them, Future Peeds Res is like a, again, I'm speaking from my pediatrics little world over here. Future Peeds Res is an organization that's free. They're mostly based online. They do a lot of stuff with connecting students to schools. So they've been doing almost what I like to call speed dating events, where for various regions across the United States, each program gets 5 minutes to talk about their program for a group of students, and then you can ask them questions. So you get to like speed date all of the programs, because with COVID, you can't go and see everybody. So that's been really helpful. So if your specialty that you're interested does something like that, I would highly recommend getting hooked in with something like that, because it's so, so important to be trying to get hooked into all of these things. And you learn which programs allow IMGs, which don't. And that can be really stressful. So Match a Resident has also been really helpful with that, just in determining like what requirements I need to apply to different programs. So they've been really helpful with that at this time of year as well.
Yeah, those are some really great and useful advices, especially for webinars. I think a lot of people are not aware of it, that it's a possibility that you can attend it. So I think it's really useful that you mentioned it. So thank you for that. It's
a lot
really
of I don't know if this applies to other specialties, but a lot of pediatric residencies have Instagram pages that the residents run and they're very active on. And that's where they've been advertising a lot of these webinars. So Future Peeds Res has most of them listed on, they've got like a mass calendar, but for various residency programs, like Instagram, like where we are right now, is actually, I was really surprised with how helpful just Instagram, the platform, has been with connecting me to various residency programs.
Yeah, that's actually pretty good, because I was one of the students that was not aware that Instagram, Twitter, and social media can actually help you with this process. And I'm actually starting to learn now. So as you said, it can be really, really helpful. All the Instagram pages and residency programs have their own pages, and they share very useful information, some links to webinars and open hours and everything else. So yeah, it can be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
When you mentioned program list, I just wanted to add that I'm also making my program list as well. And I'm also using Match Resident and Residency Explorer. I like that we have that customized program list, so I don't have to go through all programs that I don't fulfill the requirements for. But it's still a lot of programs, and I cannot apply to every single one of it. So I just have to choose. I'm actually planning to apply to around 150, I believe. I will see, but I'm also finalizing that, and we'll see. I hope it will be done soon. What else I want to ask you? I have one more question for you about ERAS application. I just want to mention your music talent, because I'm beyond impressed with that. So I'm just interested in how you will implement that in your ERAS application, because I think it's quite amazing, and that it's something that I would be really proud of to talk about in my ERAS application. So I just wanted to ask you how you will put that. Will you put it in your personal statement, or like maybe if you had some work experience regarding that, how would you put that in your case?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, what Tanya is referring to is that prior to me being in medical school, I was a musician, and my job that I worked in was a music therapist. So I'm a board certified music therapist in the United States. And that meant that part of the work that I did before medical school, I worked clinically for 2 years as a music therapist before going to medical school. And the roles and responsibilities of a music therapist are very different, very, very different than those of a physician. But some of the skills that I learned have transferred really well. And I think that's how I've been trying to structure my application when referring to my music therapy experience. So I did mention Like I worked for a private music therapy firm in Austin, Texas. I mentioned that as one of my work experiences, even though it occurred just before medical school, is my last job before medical school. I was working in a clinical environment for 2 years, and I think that some of the skills that I learned are transferable. And I think it's important when you're looking at these non-medical experiences to pull out, here are the things that, yes, it's a non-medical environment, but I still had to work in a team in this environment. I still had to organize, I still had to manage, I still had to do all of these non-clinical related tasks that are important to have as a resident. And I think the other thing is that I did mention more of my extracurricular musical activities. So for those of you who also don't know, I was a semi-finalist on Ireland's Got Talent. So I've done music outside of a clinical environment for a long time as well. And for me, music is always something that comes back to self-care. So when I approach it, I approached this kind of topic in my personal statement and talked about how me being able to fall back on a routine self-care practice like music has made me a lot more resilient and has made me very, sorry, I'm kind of dragging this out a little bit without intending to, but it's made me more resilient, and I've been able to fight off some of the medical school burnout and some of the clinical burnout by always having this kind of something outside of medicine to bring me back and keep me grounded.
Those are some great points. I think those are great advices that everybody can actually relate to, because most of the people have some kind of interest or hobbies or some talents outside of medicine. And I think it's really important to implement that in our application, because it just tells program directors so much more who we are as a person. Because, okay, we are great candidates, we are great doctors, but there's so much more to our personality besides us being medical students and doctors. So I think it's a really nice story that you just said, because we can just get encouraged to implement those other stuff that we maybe feel unsure of. I was having that kind of feeling. They don't care about my extracurricular activities because it's not related to medicine. But now I actually believe it's really important to just mention things, because they can have a better and full picture about you as a person.
No, I completely agree. They give program directors an idea of who you are outside of the hospital. But I think the important part to kind of come back to is, how do your hobbies fulfill you? Do you like to run? Is like running is okay. But like, do you like to run? Is one of the other things. Do you like to play sports? How do you take care of yourself? How are you going to make sure that you make it to the other side of our arduous residency process? And having those other hobbies and skills to come back to outside of medicine that make sure that you're going to come to work every day and be a healthy and productive resident is important.
Yeah, I completely agree. I did similar things with my non-medical experiences that I had. I was really, I had a hard time deciding if I put that in my personal statement or not. And I just mentioned it in a personal statement in that way, as you said, how those non-medical jobs actually helped me become a better person and a better candidate, because I used to work, for example, 15, 16 hours a day, 2 different jobs. And I said, okay, I used to do that for months. So I'm definitely ready to start a residency tomorrow and to work long shifts. And also, if you worked in different kind of teams with different people, especially with different backgrounds, you can also mention that. So now I feel I'm a better team player. Or if you were a leader, if you're in charge of organizing something, if you were managing something, also those are some skills that you can transfer to your residency. So I think don't hesitate to mention those skills if you have it. Just mention it in your personal statement. You don't have to put it in a work experience if you don't have specific work experience, but you can just mention it in a paragraph or two in your personal statement. I think it can be really beneficial.
Yeah. So I've noticed that we have a couple of questions that have come in. Some of them are in the chat and some of them are in the question box. So I'm going to do the ones in the question box first. So someone is asking, how would emergency medicine, neurology, or pediatrics letters of recommendation fit into an internal medicine residency application?
So my opinion, and according to internet, I think if you're applying for internal medicine, you should have at least one letter of recommendation for internal medicine physician, and other two can be some other subspecialties. But if all your letters are outside internal medicine, that it's not going to look really good actually, because it can raise the question, okay, is he or she really interested in internal medicine if you have a letters from neurologist or emergency medicine or anything else? So I think it cannot harm you, but try to have at least one very strong letter from internal medicine physician. So
and I would agree with that advice. I think internal medicine is probably one of the specialties that's a little bit more flexible with where your letters can be from. Internal medicine, maybe family medicine. Like I've got a lot of friends that are applying in family medicine, and for them, having a family medicine letter and then having maybe a Peeds letter is helpful for them, just because they see a lot of pediatric patients in family medicine. For me, going into pediatrics, most of my letters are from pediatricians, but I got a really, really great letter from my OB-GYN rotation, in my OB-GYN clerkship. I got an amazing letter. So yes, most of my letters are from pediatricians, but I've got a couple that are from other specialties. So I think that kind of advice goes through a lot of different specialties, just because you want to make sure that you're demonstrating that you have experience in the specialty that you want to go into, but also that you play well with others, that you have experience in other areas of medicine.
Yeah, I agree.
Another question that I have is, how do you approach non-medical experiences within a religious community?
I don't have that kind of experience, but if it's something that is important for you personally, and if you want to mention it because it's really important for you as a person, I would definitely mention it in a personal statement. But I'm not really sure. I read some advices on that kind of topic, and some advice that we should avoid religious and political topics. But if it's a volunteer experience, if you helped with a church community or something like that, I think it's a really, really nice experience to mention. So it's just really important to pack it nicely in your personal statement, and why is this important for you. So I think you can definitely mention it.
Yeah.
I don't know, do you agree or?
I completely agree. I completely agree. If it's something that's extremely important to who you are and your identity, then it might be very important to mention. And then if you're also packaging this within, well, yes, I'm a part of this religious community, but I also volunteer within this religious community, and I also have this kind of personal experience, it would probably go into either a small section of your personal statement, or if you volunteered with them, it would go into a volunteer experience. But I wouldn't necessarily put it other places.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Okay, other questions. How many paragraphs are ideal for the personal statement?
I'm not sure about the paragraphs. I know ideal is to be 1 page, right? If I'm correct, because they don't want to read if it's longer than 1 page. So I think I will have like 3 or 4 paragraphs, 5 maximum. And I think that's all right for 1 page. And also, my personal opinion, I just believe reading all the recommendations and advices online, I just think that's not really that important, how many paragraphs you have. I think the content is what's important, and you don't go over 1 page. And that's it.
Yeah. I think for my personal statement, it's in and around 900 words, because the advice that I was given was more around words rather than paragraph count. And yes, the 1 pager is really important depending on your specialty. So for example, pediatrics tends to be gives a little bit more leeway with what you're looking to do. It's important to make sure that you try and stay as close to the one page as possible. And then the other thing that I want to mention about personal statements is that some programs will have requirements for their personal statement. So for example, I am applying to Boston Medical Center. And that program requires that you have an addenda at the end of your personal statement with a couple of specific questions that they want answered if you don't answer them in your personal statement. So that means that personal statement is going to be longer than a page because of that addendum. And they wrote in their kind of application requirements for that hospital that they understand that. So I think it's important that you look at those program-specific personal statement requirements because they will change depending on the program that you're applying to.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. The good thing is it's really important to pay attention on that, but I think also the great thing is that most of the internal medicine programs, for example, have those kind of requirements.
Yeah.
So don't get scared. Just be sure to check because it's really useful, as you said, if they have some specific requirements. Yes.
Yeah. Like the majority of the pediatric programs don't have any personal statement requirements, but the odd one does. And this is actually a great piece of advice. Something that my friend and I did is that we're both applying in pediatrics. We made a spreadsheet that has all of the pediatric programs on it. And he wrote down if they require a visa, if they take IMGs, if they have a personal statement requirement, and what the program's mission statement is. And we've been filling it out. She took half, I took half, and we just filled it. Because that way I'm not having to do all of the research myself. I have a little bit of help. And she doesn't have to do all of the research herself. So if you have a buddy or you have a friend that's also applying in internal medicine, make a spreadsheet. I know internal medicine has way more programs than Peeds, so that might not be feasible. But pediatrics, it's entirely feasible. There's about 200 of them.
Oh, really? Oh, that's that sounds amazing. Yeah. I just have like on Metro Resident, like my customized program list has like more than 400 programs.
Oh, geez.
And
okay,
that's customized. So yeah. So yeah, I cannot, like, I'm trying to do my best to research every program, but sometimes it's just impossible because it's so time consuming.
Yeah.
Like, But great advice is because a lot of people are not applying for internal medicine. If they're applying for emergency medicine, pediatrics, or anything else, it's a great advice. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have the time, if you have friends who you can split up the list with, like, go for it. Because 99% of the programs don't have any requirements, but that 1% that does, if you then submit a general personal statement, it's like, so just be sure. I would just check, especially if it's a program that you're really interested in. Check the requirements.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have some more?
Okay.
Questions?
So that was all from the question box. Does it matter if your LORs are from the US?
Well, I think yes, because if you check, I think we have those information from Metro Resident, and some programs actually on their website, and you can also find that information from Metro Resident, they really specify that they require at least one or more US-based letter of recommendation. So I think it's important. I understand completely that a lot of applicants didn't have opportunity to do a rotation and to get a letter from US considering the pandemic and travel bans and everything. So maybe some programs will accept other letters as well. But I think it's really important to do your research because it depends on the program. Some programs do require it, specifically from US, 1, 2, or all 3 to be from US, but some programs accept letters from your home country. So I think you just have to check for a specific program that you're applying for. I don't know, do you have any information about?
I think you've really said it all. The other thing that I will say is that some of the programs have written that they accept that they accept letters from other countries, but then list specific countries that they accept letters from. Like, I think University of Albany, maybe. One of the programs I was looking at, and I think it was University of Albany, but I'll have to double check, stated that they took letters from other countries. They preferred US letters, but that if you had one from the UK, Ireland, or Canada, that you were also fine.
Yeah.
So some of them will have country-specific requirements or recommendations. So unfortunately, that's a big challenge, and especially with the pandemic. And again, if you don't have any US LORs, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get a residency or you're not going to match. Something that you might want to do is address why you weren't able to get any American experience, saying, you know, I'm from the example here that the person is saying is I'm from Turkey, and maybe if you weren't able to travel because of the pandemic, or you weren't able to get US experience because of the pandemic, but then stating how the experience you got in Turkey would transfer to a US residency in your personal statement might be a good place to address it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and then I see a couple more questions have popped in. What are the chances of matching to Peeds? I think this is my step one. So the thing is, I don't really know for Peeds specifically, a lot of the programs have been emphasizing a de-emphasization. They've been emphasizing a de-emphasization on board scores for pediatric programs. They're trying to look at applications more holistically. That doesn't mean that board scores aren't important. It just means that they're not the be-all, end-all to your application. I, as someone who's currently trying to match this cycle, and even other residents who are currently in programs, wouldn't really be able to tell you your chances of matching. All I'd really be able to tell you is that you are more than your board score, and your application demonstrates more of who you are beyond that 3-digit score that you get on USMLE.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think so many IMGs are so afraid and so focused on that step scores, they just neglect all the other parts of application and importance of all the other parts of application. I think, okay, scores are important, but there's so many other things that you can do to improve your chances. So if you had a low score, okay, it's not the end of the world. You can still match. Just focus on other aspects of your application. So yeah, definitely. Don't get discouraged. Just apply. Search your programs, search the requirements, and definitely, I think we all have our place here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then someone else is asking advice on working full-time, but also trying to study for STEP exams. So I don't have experience with this, but I don't know, Tanya, if you have any experience with this.
For step one, I was not working because I was so afraid of step one. It was such a new concept for me and I didn't know where to start. So I was not working during my step one. I did work when I was preparing for step two, but I just want to highlight that step two is easier compared to step one for most of the applicants. So it's not really the same. It was it was hard. I don't want to lie, because I'm the kind of a person when I'm studying for that kind of exam, which is extremely important for me. I just want to be completely focused on that and just to plan my time for studying and not to include anything else. So it was harder, but in the same time, I was studying it right after I passed step one. So it was in a way easier. But I want to mention I have a very close friend who worked full-time in a hospital and prepared for steps, and he did great. He did like 250 if I'm not wrong for step one. But I just want to say that he was preparing for 2 years or longer, but he was ready for it. He said, okay, I need to work, I need to have finances to, you know, cover all these expenses, and I know I will need more time, but I'm ready for it. So he was not able to study every single day, And it's a lot of sacrifice if you work and study for this at the same time. But he did it. So I think you just have to be realistic and to make a timeline and not to expect from yourself that you'll be able to finish step 1 in 2 months if you're working full time. It's just not feasible for most people.
Yeah. And there are still programs that require higher step scores, and there are still specialties that place more emphasis on step scores. I'm speaking from my experience as someone who's applying in pediatrics, and what I've been hearing from program directors from the calls that I've been on is that they're placing less of an emphasis on them in pediatrics, but that doesn't mean that they're placing less of an emphasis on them in emergency medicine or internal medicine or surgery. So I can really only speak to my own experiences. And this isn't to say that step scores don't matter. It's just to say that they're only one part of your application.
Exactly. It's just one part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then maybe the last question, since we're kind of reaching the top of the hour and thinking about wrap up, does working in a private clinic with hands-on experience count as U.S. clinical experience if you are a graduate?
Yes. That's my kind of experience. That's the only experience that I had. So yes, that's U.S. clinical experience, definitely. Also, I just want to say important thing that I just realized, and I was really surprised by it. It's really important to, as we said many times, to research every program specifically that you want to apply for. Because I just saw a natural resident that some programs do not consider stellar rotation as U.S. clinical experience, and I know a lot of people abroad have been doing stellar rotations because that was the only way for them to have some kind of U.S. clinical experience and to get a letter of recommendation. So I was really surprised to see that some programs do not accept stellar rotation as a U.S. clinical experience. But if you were here doing observership, hands-on rotation, externership, whatever you want to call it, after you graduate, it's U.S. clinical experience. You are here, you are working in clinic, it's U.S. clinical experience. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really great to point out because a lot of people have done telerotations, and telerotations can be beneficial as a part of your application, but again, it's important to research if your program that you're applying to will count it as part of U.S. clinical experience or not. So that was really, really great to point out.
Thank you. I also saw some program, I'm really, really not sure which program because I think I'm not applying there. That is actually, that program is not considering anything as U.S. clinical experience except for electives that you can do only when you're a student. So it's just up to a program. Thankfully, there is not a lot of programs like that. Most of the programs accept observership and everything else as a U.S. clinical experience, but you just have to be very careful when applying for a program just to check all those facts because every single program is a story for themselves, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think with that, thank you so much for joining me on this live. And I think you actually, this live was your idea, and I am so thankful for you putting it together. So thank you so much. Be sure to follow us on our separate Instagram pages. Mine is at Tara Jamison Music.
And mine is Medicine Made Easy. I think you can find our handles here after the live, and we'll tag ourselves and we'll save this live so you can watch it later. You can find us, and I think I want to thank you that you actually accept to join it because I think we have different kind of experiences, and when people hear it, it can be helpful for them, and I really hope that we helped somebody. And I think we're both willing to help on our Instagram pages, so you can always send us a DM or ask us or check our posts. As Tara mentioned, she has a great post describing her experience in New York. I also had some posts about USMLE and everything else, so feel free to contact us, and we're here to help.
Yeah, we're here to help, and so is Match a Resident, so follow them. If you guys want more lives like this, they do them all the time with students like me and other people, other medical people who, blah, 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 blah. I am running out of words. there are lots of different people that do these lives. Some of them are students or applicants like Tanya and I. Some of them are people like Zeph. Yes, we'll put our handles in the chat box. That's great. So please follow Match a Resident. They have a lot of great experience. So thank you guys so much. Thank you. And thank you so much for joining me. This will get posted, and we'll see you guys all in the future. Good luck this application season.
Good luck, and thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.